The lawyer's hands trembled as he broke the wax seal on Eleanor Ashford's final will and testament. Around the mahogany table, the family sat in their customary positions, Richard at the head, his brother Thomas to the right, and sister Caroline across from him. Judith had taken her usual seat at Richard's left hand, the position she'd occupied for 15 years of family gatherings. But today, someone new stood by the door. Mercy, 23 years old, skin the color of warm mahogany, eyes wide with confusion, clutched her mother's hand. She still wore her maid's uniform, the same crisp black and white she'd worn while serving canapés at Eleanor's funeral reception just hours before. "This is irregular," Caroline murmured, eyeing Mercy with barely concealed disdain. "Mother's instructions were explicit," the lawyer replied. "Everyone named in the will must be present." Judith's stomach twisted. Why would Eleanor include the help in her will reading? A small bequest, perhaps? Eleanor had always been fond of Mercy's mother, the quiet Haitian woman who'd run the household for 25 years. The lawyer cleared his throat. "I, Eleanor Catherine Ashford, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament." He paused, looking up at the assembled family with something like pity. "To my sons Thomas and Richard, and my daughter Caroline, I leave the sum of $5 million each, to be held in trust with conditions outlined in Appendix A." Relieved murmurs rippled through the room. $5 million was less than expected, but respectable. "To my daughter-in-law Judith Marie Ashford, I leave my personal jewelry collection and my gratitude for years of unwitting service." Judith's breath caught. Unwitting service? What did that mean? The lawyer's voice hardened. "And to Mercy Dubois, daughter of Richard Ashford and Marie Claire Dubois, I leave the entirety of my remaining estate, Ashford Manor and all properties, all stocks, bonds, and liquid assets, totaling approximately $900 million. The antique clock on the mantel ticked once, twice, 3 times. Then Judith's world ended. "Daughter of—" The words caught in her throat. She turned to Richard, searching his face for denial, for shock, for anything that would make this make sense. His eyes were closed, his jaw clenched, his hands, those familiar hands she'd held for 15 years, gripped the armrests of his chair until his knuckles went white. He knew. Judith's gaze swept the room. Thomas stared at his shoes. Caroline examined her manicure with intense focus. The lawyer wouldn't meet her eyes. They all knew. Everyone in this room knew that her husband had a daughter. Everyone knew that the young woman who served her breakfast every morning was Richard's child. Everyone knew that for 15 years Judith had been living a lie so elaborate, so complete, that she'd never even suspected. "There is one additional item," the lawyer said softly, pulling a cream envelope from the folder, "for Mrs. Judith Ashford, to be opened privately." The envelope landed on the table in front of her like a bomb. Judith picked it up with numb fingers. Her name was written in Eleanor's elegant script across the front, and beneath it 3 words that made her blood run cold. "Now you know." But before we begin, do well to like this video, drop your comments, and please do not fail to subscribe to this channel so you do not miss any video. We love crafting these amazing stories for your viewing pleasure. Now, where were we? The lock clicked with a finality that matched the slamming of Judith's heart against her ribs. Behind the heavy mahogany door, Richard's voice rose and fell in desperate waves. "Judith, please, let me explain. I can explain everything." She pressed her back against the door, the cream envelope clutched against her chest like a shield. Could he explain? Could anyone explain 15 years of calculated deception? Her hands trembled as she crossed to the bed, their bed, where she'd slept beside a stranger every night for a decade and a half. The envelope's weight was wrong, too heavy for just paper. She broke the seal Eleanor had pressed with her own hands, probably in this very room, knowing exactly what bomb she was leaving behind. Inside, a letter in Eleanor's elegant script and a small USB drive that caught the lamplight like a black diamond. Judith unfolded the letter. Eleanor's handwriting was steady, controlled, revealing nothing of the chaos these words would unleash. Dearest Judith, if you're reading this, you now know what everyone else has known for 15 years. The words blurred. Judith blinked hard, forcing herself to read every sentence, every carefully chosen word. Eleanor's voice echoed in her mind, that cultured, measured tone that had welcomed Judith into the family, that had toasted at her wedding, that had never once wavered with guilt. I needed someone who wouldn't see. The letter slipped from Judith's fingers, drifting to the Persian rug like a white flag of surrender. She stared at the USB drive in her palm. Part of her wanted to throw it out the window, to preserve some small corner of her memories untainted. But Eleanor had known she wouldn't. Eleanor had understood that Judith would need to see everything, to understand the full architecture of the lie she'd been living in. Her laptop sat on the writing desk by the window. Judith's legs felt disconnected from her body as she crossed the room. The USB drive clicked into place with a sound like a door closing. The first folder was labeled simply, Before. She clicked. The screen filled with photographs. Richard and a young woman with skin like polished mahogany and eyes that held the kind of light Judith had only seen in poetry. They were wrapped around each other on a beach somewhere, Richard's face open in a way Judith had never witnessed. In another photo, Marie Claire was visibly pregnant, her hand resting on the curve of her belly, while Richard knelt before her, his lips pressed to where his child grew. Judith's breath came in short gasps. She clicked to the next folder, Correspondence. Email after email from Eleanor to Richard. The Whitmore girl is perfect, intelligent enough to be interesting, naive enough to never question. Marry her. Another. I've arranged a chance meeting at the Pemberton Gallery. She loves impressionist paintings. Wear the blue suit. Be charming. Think of it as an audition for the rest of your life. The financial records were clinical in their precision. $50,000 annually to Marie Claire Dubois. Private cottage rental, $0. Estate property. Educational trust for Mercy Dubois, $500,000, growing at 7% annually. Every transaction documented, every payment a brick in the wall that had enclosed Judith without her ever knowing she was trapped. The final folder made her hands shake so badly she nearly couldn't click it. Tuesday, Thursday. Video files. Dozens of them. The first was dated 3 months after Judith's wedding. She pressed play. The footage was grainy, shot from a distance, probably Eleanor's doing, documenting her own manipulation. Richard walked across the estate grounds towards the cottage Judith had been told was under renovation. A little girl, maybe 4 years old, ran out to meet him. He swept her into his arms, spinning her around while she laughed. Mercy. Judith scrolled forward. Mercy at 6, Richard teaching her to ride a bicycle. Mercy at 10, Richard helping with homework at the cottage kitchen table. Mercy at 15, Richard sitting in the back row of a school auditorium while his daughter performed in a play. Always there, always hidden, always choosing to be a father to one child while letting Judith believe they could have children together someday. She pulled up a family photo from their 10th anniversary. There was Judith, smiling beside Richard, wearing the emerald necklace he'd given her. But now she saw what she'd never noticed before. The angle was wrong. The photographer had positioned them carefully so the cottage would be outside the frame, so Mercy, playing in the garden just beyond view, would remain invisible. She'd been edited out of her own father's life, and Judith had been edited in.
The bathroom tiles were cold against her knees as Judith vomited, her body purging what her mind couldn't process. She wept after, great heaving sobs that shook her entire frame. Outside, Richard had finally stopped knocking. The house was silent except for the sound of her breaking. But somewhere around 3 a.m., between one sob and the next, something crystallized inside her. The tears slowed, her breathing steadied. She washed her face with cold water, watching it drip from her chin into the marble sink. At 4:47 a.m., Judith stopped crying. She closed the laptop, stood, and looked herself in the mirror. The woman staring back was a stranger, red-eyed, hollow-cheeked, stripped of every illusion she'd wrapped herself around like silk scarves. Good. Strangers were harder to deceive.
The breakfast room was bathed in morning light when Judith descended the stairs. Through the French doors, she could see the manicured grounds stretching toward the cottage she'd never been allowed to enter. The family sat in their usual positions around the table, Eleanor's chair conspicuously empty, a ghost presiding over the meal. They froze when she entered. Caroline's fork clattered against her plate. Thomas's coffee cup paused halfway to his lips. Richard half rose from his seat, his face haggard. Judith walked to her chair, the one she'd occupied for 15 years of family breakfasts, and sat. She reached for the coffee pot with steady hands, poured, added cream. The silence was suffocating. "Judith," Richard began. "Not yet." Her voice was calm, almost pleasant. She buttered a slice of toast with deliberate precision. "I'm going to eat breakfast. Then I'm going to ask each of you some questions, and you're going to answer them, honestly, for the first time in 15 years. She took a bite of toast, chewed, swallowed, took a sip of coffee. Around her, no one moved. Finally, she set down her cup and turned to Thomas. "When did you know?" Thomas's eyes darted to Richard, seeking permission that would never come. "Before your wedding," he said quietly. "Mom told us she'd found Richard a solution." "A solution?" Judith's laugh was brittle. "That's what I was?" "That's what she called it." Judith nodded as if he'd confirmed the weather. She turned to Caroline. "Did you ever think about telling me?" Caroline's perfectly manicured hands twisted in her lap. "Every time you asked why you couldn't have children," her voice cracked, "I thought you deserved to know that Richard already had a daughter, but Mom said it would destroy the family. So you chose the family over me." "You weren't really family, Judith." Caroline's words landed like stones. "You were adjacent." Adjacent. 15 years reduced to a single word. She felt it settle in her chest, heavy and final. She turned to Richard last. He was crying silently, tears streaming down his face in a way she'd never witnessed in their entire marriage. "Did you love me, even a little?" I cared for you," his voice broke. "I respected you." "That's not what I asked." The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Finally, Richard spoke. "I loved Marie Claire then, and never stopped. I married you because my mother threatened to cut me off completely if I didn't. I visited Merci 3 times a week for her entire life. I wanted to tell you countless times, but I couldn't find the words." Judith thought of all those Tuesday and Thursday evenings, business dinners, he'd said, late meetings. She'd never questioned it. She'd been so desperately committed to believing in their life together that she'd made herself blind. "The worst part," Richard continued, tears flowing freely now, "is that you're good, Judith. You're genuinely good, and I used that goodness every single day." Judith sat back in her chair. Around her, the breakfast room,
with its crystal chandelier and oil paintings and silver that had been in the family for generations, suddenly felt like a mausoleum, a beautiful tomb for a life that had never really existed. She thought of the IVF treatments, the hope that had died with each negative test. Richard had held her while she cried, had whispered that they'd try again, knowing all along that he already had a daughter, that he spent his Tuesday and Thursday evenings being the father he'd never be to any child of Judith's. Judith set down her coffee cup with perfect control. Where is she? Where is Merci? Richard looked up, confused. The cottage. Why? Because, Judith said, standing, she and I need to talk. We're the only two people in this house who didn't know we were living in a lie.
The morning mist clung to the grounds as Judith walked the path she'd never been permitted to take. The cottage sat at the edge of the estate like a secret in plain sight. Charming, well-maintained, with flower boxes bursting with geraniums and a small garden that showed signs of careful tending. Not under renovation, not storage, a home. She knocked. The door opened almost immediately, as if someone had been watching her approach. Marie-Claire stood in the doorway. She was beautiful in a way that photographs couldn't capture. Elegant, with salt and pepper hair pulled back in a simple twist, wearing clothes that were plain but somehow looked sophisticated on her frame. Her eyes held no surprise, only a weary resignation. "I wondered when you'd come," Marie-Claire said softly. "Is she here? Messy? Inside?" The cottage was everything the manor was not. Warm, lived in, real. Photos covered every wall, Merci's entire life documented in frames. First day of school, gap-toothed and beaming. Birthday cakes with candles. Holiday dinners at a small table. And in so many of them, Richard appeared at the edge of the frame, always slightly out of focus, as if even in his own family pictures he was trying to hide. Merci sat on a worn sofa, clutching legal documents in trembling hands. Her eyes were swollen from crying. At 23, she looked impossibly young to be holding papers that made her worth nearly $1 billion. "I don't want it," Merci said the moment she saw Judith. "The money, the house, any of it. This is blood money." Judith sat in the chair across from her, careful to maintain distance. "Eleanor left it to you, not to punish you, to punish them." "She never even spoke to me directly," Merci's voice cracked. "My whole life I lived 100 yards from that mansion, and the woman who owned it never said a word to me. She paid for my school, my clothes, my life, but she couldn't look at me." The words hung in the air between them, two women destroyed by the same architect, sitting in the ruins trying to understand the blueprint. They talked for hours. Marie-Claire brought tea and quietly disappeared, giving them space to excavate the truth. Judith learned that Merci had known Richard was her father since age 7, when she'd asked her mother why the man from the big house visited so often. Marie-Claire had told her the truth as gently as she could. "He loves us, but he can't be with us. His mother won't allow it." Merci had grown up watching Judith from a distance, seeing her walk the grounds, host parties, sit beside Richard at family functions. "I used to hate you," Merci admitted, her voice small. "I used to have the life I wanted. You got to sit next to him at dinner. You got to call him your husband." "But you had him," Judith said, understanding dawning like a cold sunrise. "Tuesday and Thursday evenings, school plays, homework help.
He was your father." "I did," Merci agreed. "But then I got older and I realized you had the lie. My mother had his heart." She looked at Judith with something like pity. "I used to feel guilty about that you didn't know you were alone." Judith felt the weight of it settle. Merci had spent her childhood feeling guilty for Judith's ignorance, a child carrying the shame of adults' choices. "Did you ever want to tell me?" Judith asked. "All the time," Merci whispered. "Especially when you'd walk past the cottage and wave. You always waved. Mom said Miss Eleanor would destroy us all if I ever spoke to you." The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Eleanor had positioned them all like pieces on a chessboard. Judith in the manor, blind and content. Merci in the cottage, hidden and guilty. Marie Claire caught between her child and her lover. Richard split down the middle, living two lives, but whole in neither. Judith reached across the space between them and took Merci's hand. The young woman's fingers were cold, trembling. "We're going to figure this out," Judith said. Merci looked at her with wide, disbelieving eyes. "Together?" "Everyone else in that house made their choices. You and I didn't get to choose, so now we will."
The master key felt heavy in Judith's palm as she stood before Eleanor's private office. For 15 years, this door had been locked, off limits even to family. "Mother needs her sanctuary," Richard had always said, as if that explained everything. Now Judith understood. Sanctuaries were where you kept your secrets safe. The key turned smoothly. The door swung open to reveal a room that looked more like a command center than an office. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 3 walls, but these weren't decorative volumes. They were journals, ledgers, files organized with military precision. Merci stood beside her, and together they stepped into Eleanor's mind. The journals dated back 25 years, each spine labeled with the year in gold leaf. Judith pulled one from a decade ago and opened it at random. Eleanor's handwriting filled every page, not musings or reflections, but documentation. Every decision catalogued, every manipulation recorded, every payoff detailed with the precision of a general planning a campaign. Merci found the unsent letters in a locked drawer. The key had been taped inside the main envelope. Letters to Richard, to Marie Claire, to Judith, even to Merci herself. Confessions that Eleanor had written but never had the courage to send. Judith's hands trembled as she pulled out the journal from 10 years ago, flipping to a date she remembered viscerally. The day after her second failed IVF attempt. She read aloud, her voice steady. "Judith asked me today if I thought she and Richard would ever have children. I told her God's timing is perfect. The lie came easily. The truth that Richard has been secretly raising his daughter in my guest cottage would destroy everything I've built. But watching Judith's face as she described the nursery she wants to design broke something in me. She doesn't deserve this, but neither does Merci deserve to be hidden. I've created a situation where someone must suffer. I've chosen Judith because she's an outsider. Merci is blood. That is the calculus of legacy." "She knew it was wrong," Merci whispered. "She knew and did it anyway." They kept searching. Behind a panel in the bookshelf, they found video recordings, family meetings held in this very office. Judith pressed play on one labeled "The Judith Problem." On screen, the family sat around Eleanor's desk. Thomas, what if she finds out about Merci? Caroline, she won't, she's too trusting. Richard, his face anguished. This isn't right. Eleanor, calm and absolute.
Right is what preserves this family. Now let's discuss the summer schedule. We need to make sure Judith's in Europe when Merci graduates high school. They discussed her like a problem to be managed, a variable to be controlled. The financial records were equally damning. Eleanor had paid Richard a management fee that increased every year he stayed married to Judith. $50,000 the first year, $200,000 by year 10, blood money from maintaining the lie. Then Judith found it, a legal document titled the Vengeance Clause. It gave her full authority to contest any part of the will, to pursue civil action against family members who participated in fraud and conspiracy to commit emotional harm. Eleanor had armed her completely. The final envelope was addressed in Eleanor's hand. Judith and Merci opened together. They sat side by side on Eleanor's leather sofa and read the letter. Eleanor's final confession, her last manipulation, or perhaps her only honest act. By the time you read this, you have found everything. You know every detail of what I did. Now you must choose, destroy the family that destroyed you, or build something new from the ruins. I am giving Merci the fortune because she is my granddaughter and deserves what should have been hers from birth. I am giving you, Judith, the weapons because you were my victim and deserve the choice I never gave you. The family thinks the money is the punishment. They're wrong. The truth is the punishment. What you do with it is yours alone. I was not a good woman. I was a strategic one. I hope you both become better than me. Judith set down the letter. Around them, Eleanor's documentation sprawled like the entrails of a dissected lie. They had everything they needed to destroy the Ashford family, financially, socially, completely. "What do you want?" Judith asked Merci. The young woman looked at the fortune spread before them, evidence, money, power. Her answer, when it came, was heartbreakingly simple. I want my father to admit I exist. I want him to choose me just once. Judith nodded. Then let's make him.
Patricia Chen's office was all glass and steel, the opposite of the Ashford family lawyer's wood-paneled sanctuary of old money. She spread Eleanor's evidence across her conference table like a dealer laying out cards, her sharp eyes cataloging each damning piece. You have enough here to sue every member of the family for fraud, emotional distress, and conspiracy, Patricia said, tapping a manicured nail against the video files. We could tie them up in court for years, bleed them dry. That's not what we want, Judith said. Patricia looked up, surprised. Then what do you want? Merci leaned forward. We want them to tell the truth, publicly. We want my father to acknowledge me. We want the family to apologize. Patricia nodded slowly, a slight smile playing at her lips. That's harder than money. People will give up fortunes before they'll give up face. Then we take both, Judith said quietly. The transformation began the next day. Merci's belongings, what little she had, moved from the cottage into a guest room in the manor's east wing. Not the cottage, not hidden, present, visible, undeniable. Caroline found Judith in the hallway, her face flushed with fury. You can't be serious. After everything, you're letting her move in? She was born here, Judith said, her voice even. She has more right to this house than I do. She's Eleanor's granddaughter. I'm just the woman who was fooled into thinking she was family. Caroline opened her mouth, closed it, then turned and walked away. The power shift was seismic. Merci, who the family had treated as invisible, as a problem to be managed, as a secret to be kept, was now impossible to ignore. She ate at the dining table, she walked the halls, she existed in spaces that had been carefully choreographed to exclude her for 23 years. The family didn't know how to function without Eleanor's iron control, without the system she'd built to keep everyone in their designated roles. They moved around Maid'S like water around a stone, unable to ignore her, but unwilling to acknowledge her directly. Richard tried to approach his daughter on the third day. Judith watched from the library window as he crossed the foyer toward where Maid'S sat reading. She looked up, saw him coming, and simply stood and left the room. His hand, half raised in greeting, fell to his side. That evening he came to Judith's room. She'd moved into a guest suite. Sleeping in their shared bed had become impossible. He stood in the doorway like a supplicant. "Please," he said, "make her talk to me." "Make her?" Judith laughed, bitter and sharp. "Richard, you had 23 years to talk to your daughter as your daughter. You chose silence. Why would she choose anything different?" "I was afraid." "Of what? Losing money, losing status, or losing the comfortable life where you got to have everything without making any real choices?" Richard's face crumpled. He slid down the doorframe until he was sitting on the floor, his head in his hands. "I lost her anyway, and I lost you, and for what? Money I never earned and respect I never deserved." Judith looked at him, this man she'd slept beside for 15 years, this stranger she'd never really known. She felt nothing, not anger, not pity, not even satisfaction at his breakdown, just a vast, empty space where love had pretended to live. "You should talk to Marie Claire. She's the only one who might still listen." That night, Judith stood at her bedroom window, unable to sleep. Below, Richard walked across the grounds toward the cottage, his figure small in the moonlight. He stood outside Marie Claire's door for 20 minutes, never knocking, his hand rising and falling like a man trying to remember how to ask for forgiveness. Finally, he turned and walked back to the manor alone, his shoulders hunched against the weight of choices made decades ago. Some bridges, once burned, leave nothing but smoke.
The Ashford Foundation Charity Gala had always been the crown jewel of the social season. Crystal chandeliers, champagne towers, society's elite gathered in their finest to celebrate philanthropy and be seen doing it. This year, the crowd was larger than ever. Word had spread about Eleanor's will. Everyone wanted to witness what came next. Judith and Mercy arrived together, a united front that made the crowd part like the Red Sea. Judith wore a black gown that hugged her frame like elegant armor, her hair swept up to reveal the emerald earrings Eleanor had left her. Mercy wore white, virginal, vulnerable, deliberate. She looked like exactly what she was, young, about to step into a spotlight that had denied her existence for 23 years. The whispers followed them through the ballroom. Judith felt eyes tracking their movement, heard the hiss of speculation. Let them wonder. Let them watch. The truth was coming whether they were ready or not. Richard stood near the podium, his speech cards trembling in his hands. The annual Ashford family address was tradition, 30 years of Richard or his father before him speaking about legacy and responsibility and giving back. Tonight, tradition would shatter. Mercy walked to the microphone before Richard could reach it. The room fell silent, conversation dying like a candle snuffed out. "My name is Mercy Dubois," she began, her voice clear despite the tremor in her hands. "Most of you know me as the daughter of Marie Claire Dubois, the Ashford family housekeeper. Tonight, I want to introduce myself properly. I am Mercy Dubois Ashford, daughter of Richard Ashford and Marie Claire Dubois." The room erupted. Whispers became gasps. Camera phones emerged from clutches and pockets, capturing every word. Mercy's voice strengthened. "My grandmother, Eleanor Ashford, left me her fortune, not as a gift, but as an acknowledgement of a truth this family has hidden for 23 years. I am not here to shame my family. I am here to free them." She turned, finding Judith at the edge of the stage.
Judith Ashford is the kindest person I have ever met. She was lied to for 15 years by every person who claimed to love her. And yet, when she learned the truth, she didn't seek revenge, she sought understanding. Tears streamed down Mercy's face, but she didn't wipe them away. I don't want my grandmother's fortune. I want my family. All of it. The messy, complicated, painful truth of it. So tonight, I am asking my father to stand up and tell the truth. Not for the cameras, not for society, for me. The ballroom held its collective breath, 1,000 people waiting to see if Richard Ashford would choose money and reputation or his daughter. Richard stood, his speech cards fluttered to the floor, forgotten. He walked to the podium with the gait of a man approaching the gallows. His face was wet with tears. "My name is Richard Ashford," he said, his voice breaking, "and I have been a coward my entire life." What followed was a confession that would be replayed on society blogs and gossip sites for months. Richard laid bare every choice, every failure, every moment he'd chosen comfort over courage. He spoke of falling in love with Marie Claire when he was 25, of his mother forbidding the relationship because Marie Claire was unsuitable, of the pregnancy that should have changed everything, but instead changed nothing, of marrying Judith while his heart belonged to someone else, of visiting his daughter in secret for 23 years while the woman he'd married underwent IVF treatments, hoping for a child he knew would never come. "I lived a double life," Richard said, his voice raw. "I loved one woman while married to another. I was a father in secret and a husband in name only. I failed everyone who trusted me. I don't expect forgiveness from Mercy, from Marie Claire, from Judith. I expect to spend the rest of my life earning back something that might resemble integrity." The room erupted. Some applauded, for honesty, for courage, for the spectacle of it all. Others stood and left, their disgust palpable. Caroline covered her face with her hands. Thomas stared at the floor. At the back of the room, Marie Claire stood alone, tears streaming silently down her face. But Mercy walked to her father and stood beside him. She didn't embrace him, she didn't speak, but she stood there, visible, acknowledged, finally chosen. As the crowd swarmed forward with questions and cameras and judgment, Judith slipped out the side door. She'd witnessed Richard's confession, but it wasn't her absolution to give. Outside, in the cool night air, she leaned against the stone wall of the venue and finally allowed herself to feel something other than anger. Relief. The truth was out. The lie that had shaped 15 years of her life was exposed. She was free.
The scandal consumed everything. Within days, the Ashford confession was featured in every society column, dissected on social media, analyzed by people who'd never met any of them but felt entitled to judgment. Society fractured into camps, those who admired Richard's honesty, those who condemned the family's decades of deception, and those who blamed Marie Claire for entrapping a wealthy man. The truth, as always, was more complicated than any narrative could hold. Judith sent the invitation by handwritten note, delivered to the cottage. Lunch? Just us. No family, no judgment. They met at a small cafe 2 towns over where no one knew the Ashford name or cared about their scandals. Marie Claire arrived early, her hands twisted nervously in her lap. When Judith sat across from her, the older woman's eyes were wary, waiting for the anger she believed she deserved. "Did you love him?" Judith asked without preamble. "Really love him?" "Every day for 27 years, Marie Claire said simply, "even when it destroyed me." "Why did you stay? You could have left, started over." "I could have." Marie Claire's voice was soft, accented with the Hades she'd left behind. "But then I would have been away from him, and he would have been alone with his mother's control. I chose a life in the shadows because it meant I could be near him. Was that weak?"
Judith considered, tracing the rim of her coffee cup. I think it was human. They talked for hours. Two women who'd loved the same man in different ways, who'd been used by the same family for different purposes. Marie-Claire revealed she'd come to America with nothing, that falling in love with Richard hadn't been part of any plan. When Eleanor discovered the pregnancy, Marie-Claire had been given a choice that wasn't really a choice: leave with money but lose Richard forever, or stay as staff and raise her daughter in his proximity. I felt guilty about you every single day, Marie-Claire said, tears pooling in her eyes. I would see you walking the grounds, planning your life with him, and I wanted to tell you. But Miss Eleanor said if I spoke one word, she'd send me back to Haiti and make sure Merci never saw her father again. We were all her prisoners, Judith said quietly. She built a prison so elegant we didn't even see the bars. 3 days later, at Judith's request, the entire family gathered in the Manor's library. No lawyers, no staff, just the people whose lives Eleanor had orchestrated like a cruel symphony. Judith stood before them, feeling more like a therapist than a scorned wife. We're going to tell the truth, all of it. What you knew, when you knew it, why you stayed silent. Thomas went first, his voice heavy with shame. I knew before your wedding, Judith. I told Mom it was cruel. She said cruelty was sometimes necessary for family preservation. I believed her, because it was easier than fighting. Caroline's confession came through tears. I knew it from the beginning. I hated it, but I was afraid of Mom. She controlled everything, our trusts, our futures, our lives. Speaking up meant losing everything. So I told myself you seemed happy enough, that ignorance was its own kind of mercy. Richard's confession to Marie-Claire was the most painful. I should have married you. I should have lost everything and married you. I'm sorry I was too weak. Marie-Claire shook her head, her face wet with tears. I wouldn't have let you. You would have grown to resent me, resent Merci, resent the poverty. We both made choices, Richard. Mine was to stay. Yours was to comply. We're both guilty. Even Merci spoke, her voice small. I used to resent you, she said, looking at Judith. You got to sit next to him. You got to call him yours. I knew it wasn't your fault, but I resented you anyway. I'm sorry. The confessions continued, each one peeling back another layer of Eleanor's architecture. The lies had been so elaborate, so carefully maintained, that dismantling them felt like demolishing a building brick by brick. At the end of the meeting, they sat in exhausted silence. No one had been forgiven, no one had been absolved, but the truth had been spoken, and spoken truth had a weight that lies could never carry. The truth didn't erase the pain, but it replaced the lies. And that, Judith realized as she looked around the room at these broken, complicated people, was as close to healing as they would get.
Eleanor's bedroom remained untouched, a shrine to control even in death. Judith stood at the window where the matriarch had stood countless times, surveying her domain. Photos lined the dresser, family portraits carefully curated to tell the story Eleanor wanted told. Books on the nightstand, their spines uncracked, chosen for appearance rather than reading. Clothes in the closet, organized by color and season, each piece a costume for the role Eleanor played. Merci found her there, standing in the fading afternoon light. "You're leaving," Merci said. It wasn't a question. "I am," Judith confirmed, turning from the window. "This was never my home. I know that now." "Where will you go?" "I don't know yet. Somewhere I can figure out who I am when I'm not trying to be someone's wife." Merci sat on Eleanor's perfectly made bed, disturbing its pristine surface for perhaps the first time. "Patricia called. The family wants to negotiate. They're offering you a settlement, $20 million, the brownstone in the city, and a full public apology. In exchange, you drop any potential lawsuits and sign an NDA. 20 million, a public apology, and silence forever. What do you think I should do? Judith asked. I think, Mercy said carefully, that you should do whatever helps you sleep at night. Judith moved to the dresser, picking up a photo of her wedding day. She looked so happy, so convinced she'd found her place in the world. What are you going to do with the fortune? I'm giving most of it away, to scholarships for children of domestic workers, to organizations fighting labor exploitation, to places that help people Eleanor hurt. Eleanor would hate that. I know, Mercy smiled, the first genuine smile Judith had seen from her. But I think it's what she secretly wanted. Why else leave me everything? She knew I'd do the opposite of what she did. Judith set down the photo. She understood now. Eleanor's final act wasn't punishment or reward. It was liberation. She'd given Mercy the fortune, knowing she'd dismantle the empire. She'd given Judith the truth, knowing she'd choose freedom over revenge. Judith called Patricia from Eleanor's desk, using the phone that had coordinated so many deceptions. I'll take the brownstone. I'll take a settlement, 5 million, not 20. The rest goes to a foundation in Marie Claire's name for immigrant domestic workers. I won't sign an NDA. If I ever want to tell this story, I will. And I want one more thing. Richard sets up a trust for any future children I might have with someone else. A trust he funds but has no control over. So when I do rebuild my life, Eleanor's money can't touch it. Patricia was silent for a long moment. That's brilliant and cruel. I learned from the best, Judith said. Richard came to her that evening, his face haggard. He'd aged a decade in the month since the will reading. I've agreed to your terms, all of them. Good. He stood in the doorway, unable to cross the threshold. Did you ever love me? Judith considered the question, surprised to find no anger in her answer. I loved who I thought you were, but that man didn't exist. So no, I suppose I didn't love you. I loved a performance. That's fair. Richard, I hope you and Marie Claire can finally be together. I hope you can be a real father to Mercy. I hope you find whatever honor you have left and actually use it. What about you? What will you do? I'm going to become someone I actually know, Judith said, finally meeting his eyes. It's terrifying, but it's real. He nodded, understanding that this was goodbye. Not dramatic, not angry, just final. The next morning, Judith's car was packed. Mercy stood on the steps with Marie Claire, both women there to witness her departure. Richard watched from a window, too much of a coward to come down. As Judith walked out of Ashford Manor for the last time, she didn't look back. Not because she was angry, but because she was finally, after 15 years, looking forward. The bookshop smelled of old paper and possibilities. Judith had chosen it deliberately, a small storefront in a Vermont town whose name she'd picked at random from a map, a place where no one knew about Ashford Manor or society scandals or the 15 years she'd lost. The bell above the door chimed, and Judith looked up from the inventory she was cataloging. Mercy stood in the doorway, backlit by autumn sunlight, grinning. "You came!" Judith dropped her pen and crossed the shop to embrace her. "I wouldn't miss your 1-year freedom anniversary," Mercy said, hugging her back. She looked different, lighter somehow, as if the weight of being invisible had finally lifted. Her hair was cut short, modern. She wore jeans and a leather jacket. She looked like someone who'd finally been given permission to exist in the world. They settled in the back room with tea, falling into the easy rhythm they'd developed over video calls and monthly visits. Mercy pulled Judith up to speed on the aftermath she'd left behind. Richard and Marie Claire were married now. They'd had a small ceremony, just family, finally honest about who they were to each other.
Richard had resigned from the family business and was working at a nonprofit supporting immigrant families. "He's trying," Mercy said carefully. "With me, I mean. We have coffee every week. It's slow, but it's honest." Thomas and Caroline had retreated from public life. The scandal had decimated the family's social standing. Caroline had divorced her husband and moved to California, where she was reportedly volunteering at a women's shelter. Thomas was in therapy, working through decades of enabling Eleanor's cruelty. "And the foundation?" asked Judith. Mercy's face lit up. "We funded 200 scholarships for children of domestic workers. And Mom," she paused, smiling how easily the word came now, "Mom went back to school. She's studying social work. She wants to help other women who get trapped in impossible situations." "And you?" Judith asked. "Any romance?" Judith laughed, a real laugh that felt good in her chest. "I'm learning to be alone first. Turns out I never really was. I went from my parents' house to college to Richard. I'm 41 years old, and this is the first time I've ever lived just for me." "How does it feel?" "Terrifying, lonely, exhilarating, real." They talked for hours, the way they did every visit, two women who'd been written into someone else's story and finally claimed their own narratives. As the afternoon light shifted, Mercy reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. "I found this in Eleanor's papers. It was addressed to you, but marked 'Do not deliver unless she asks for it.' I thought you might want it now." Judith opened the envelope with steady hands. Eleanor's handwriting filled the page, that elegant script that had once coordinated so much deception, now offering something that might have been truth. "Dear Judith, if you're reading this, you've made it through. You've survived the truth. You've made choices. You've moved on. I want you to know, I chose you not because you were naive, but because you were kind. I knew that when everything fell apart, you wouldn't destroy Mercy in your rage. You would see her as another victim, not as the enemy. I was cruel to you, but I trusted you with the hardest truth, that love isn't always what we think it is. Richard and Marie Claire loved each other, but they failed each other. You loved Richard, but he failed you. Mercy loved her father, but he failed her. Love without integrity is just beautiful suffering. I hope you find someone who gives you both, and I hope you never forgive me, because I don't deserve it. But I do thank you for being exactly who you are. Eleanor." Judith folded the letter carefully. "She's right, you know. I don't forgive her." "Good. She shouldn't be forgiven. But I understand her. That's different." That evening, after Mercy had left to catch her train back to the city, Judith closed the shop and walked through the quiet streets. The town was preparing for evening, lights coming on in windows, the smell of dinners cooking, the ordinary rhythm of lives being lived without drama or deception. She found herself at the small bridge that crossed the river at the edge of town. From her pocket, she pulled out the only photograph she'd kept from the manor, her and Eleanor at a Christmas party 5 years ago. Eleanor looked directly at the camera, regal and controlled, every inch the matriarch, but Judith, captured in profile, was looking off to the side at something outside the frame. "I'm not looking away anymore," Judith whispered to the photograph, to Eleanor, to the woman she used to be. She tore the photo carefully down the middle, kept her half, let Eleanor's half flutter into the river below. Judith watched the paper drift downstream, spinning in the current until it disappeared around the bend. Somewhere in a cottage on the Ashford estate, a man was learning to be a father. Somewhere in a foundation office, a young woman was learning to be a philanthropist. Somewhere, a family was learning to be honest. And here, in a town whose name she'd picked at random from a map, Judith was learning to be free. It wasn't the life she'd planned. It wasn't the story she'd wanted to tell. But it was hers. Finally, completely, terrifyingly hers. And that, she realized as she walked home under the stars, was worth more than anything Eleanor could have left in a will.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the others we have on our channel. They are as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine, so do check it out. We love you.